The day Mr. Harrington first commented on my teeth, I couldn't have known he was marking me for erasure. Voice trembling. Now I haven't spoken aloud in 3 years. The mask they forced on me for being too buck-toothed started as punishment, but became my prison. Evidence of the madness they convinced the world I have, whispered. They've locked me away in this facility where my desperate notes are just symptoms of my disorder. No one believes the truth, that I was silenced simply because my smile offended a wealthy man. Pause. My name is Emma, and this is how I disappeared while standing right in front of everyone. The first time Mr. Harrington commented on my teeth, I thought it was just casual cruelty, the kind wealthy people toss at their help without thinking. Emma, do try to keep your mouth closed when you smile, he said, not even looking up from his morning paper. The weight of his words crashed through me like glass, sharp and cutting. I'd always been self-conscious about my protruding front teeth, had endured schoolyard taunts of beaver and rabbit throughout my childhood. But I needed this job desperately. My mother's medical bills were piling up, and this position paid double what I could make elsewhere. I remember how my hands trembled as I poured his coffee, my reflection distorted in the silver pot, catching glimpses of what he found so repulsive. His wife glanced at me with what I mistook for sympathy, but was merely the dispassionate assessment of someone viewing damaged goods. That night, I practiced smiling with my lips closed in the cracked mirror of my tiny staff bathroom, tears streaming down my face as I realized I'd have to police even this most basic expression of humanity. "You'll adjust," Mrs. Peterson, the head housekeeper, told me when I confided in her. Her weathered face showed the toll of 30 years serving the wealthy, eyes vacant of hope. I believed her, naive as I was, thinking that if I worked hard enough, proved myself invaluable, they might see past my physical flaws. Each morning, I arrived an hour early, polishing silver until I could see my buck-toothed reflection staring back at me from every spoon. I took on extra duties, volunteered for the tasks no one else wanted. The other staff members kept their distance, as if my degradation might be contagious, might mark them as targets too. When little Sophia, the Harringtons' 8-year-old daughter, asked me why I looked like a horse when I talked, I felt something inside me crack. I still smiled at her, lips pressed tightly together, and continued dusting the library shelves as though her innocent cruelty hadn't reached the deepest part of me. That evening, I spent my meager savings on whitening strips, as if making my shameful teeth brighter would somehow make them less visible. "I've had complaints about your appearance," Mr. Harrington announced 3 weeks later, calling me into his study. The room smelled of leather and privilege, of decisions made about people like me without consequence. My heart hammered against my ribs, a trapped bird seeking escape. "From whom?" I dared to ask, immediately regretting opening my mouth. His eyes fixed on my teeth with such disgust that I physically recoiled. "The Winthrops were quite disturbed during dinner service last night. Said it affected their appetite." I hadn't even smiled, had been so careful. Tears pricked my eyes, but I blinked them back furiously. Crying would only make things worse. He drummed his manicured fingers on his mahogany desk, the gold of his watch catching the light with each tap, reminding me of the vast gulf between us. "Perhaps," he said with chilling casualness, "you should consider dental work. We have standards here, Emma." I stood motionless, calculating the thousands I couldn't possibly afford, the years of savings it would require just to become acceptable in his eyes. The suggested solutions began to arrive on my bed like perverse gifts. A dental brochure for extensive orthodontic work, with a yellow sticky note showing the price, equivalent to 6 months of my salary. A magazine clipped to a page about cosmetic procedures, with "Consider this" scrawled in Mrs. Harrington's elegant handwriting. Each night, I researched payment plans, loans, anything that might help me escape this daily humiliation. The walls of my small staff room seemed to close in tighter with each passing day. My dreams filled with teeth falling out, with Mr. Harrington's disgusted face. I started holding a hand over my mouth whenever I spoke, a physical barrier between my shame and the world. The other maids whispered behind my back, some with pity, others with the cruel relief that comes from watching someone else be singled out. "Just quit," one finally told me during a rare moment of compassion. But where would I go? How would I pay for Mom's care? The thought of her suffering because of my pride was unbearable. So I endured, shrinking myself smaller, speaking less, trying desperately to disappear while still performing my duties impeccably. "I've come to a decision about your situation," Mr. Harrington announced at the end of my second month. I stood rigidly before his desk, eyes downcast, heart thundering so loudly I was certain he could hear it. "Since you've made no effort to address the issue," I started to protest, to explain the financial impossibility, but he silenced me with a raised hand. "I've purchased something that will solve our problem temporarily." He slid a small box across the desk. Inside, nestled on black velvet, like some grotesque jewelry, was a flesh-colored piece of fabric, a mask that would cover the lower half of my face. My stomach lurched violently. "You'll wear this during all working hours, especially when guests are present," he continued, as if discussing a new uniform policy rather than a tool of my dehumanization. I held the mask with trembling fingers, the reality of what he was asking, no, demanding, crashing over me in waves of humiliation. "This or find new employment," he added casually, already returning to his paperwork. I thought of my mother in her hospital bed, of the bills that kept coming, of the emptiness of my bank account. What choice did I really have? "How will I speak to guests?" I whispered. His smile was terrible in its satisfaction. "You won't. Catherine will handle any necessary communication." I left his study clutching the mask, wondering if there was anything left of me to silence. The first day I wore the mask felt like a death. The soft material clung to my skin, trapping my breath, muffling any sounds I might make. The other staff stared openly now, their whispers no longer hidden. "It's inhumane," I heard someone say, but no one intervened. Their own precarious positions too valuable to risk. Mrs. Harrington instructed me to nod or gesture when given orders, as if I were suddenly incapable of understanding language, rather than simply forbidden from using it. I dropped a teacup that afternoon, my vision blurred by unshed tears, my breathing labored behind the suffocating fabric. Mrs. Harrington's sigh of disappointment cut deeper than any reprimand could have. "This is why we can't have nice things," she murmured to her friend, gesturing vaguely in my direction, as if I were not a person, but a problematic piece of furniture. That night, I removed the mask and stared at the red marks it had left on my face, physical evidence of my humiliation. I tried to call my mother at the care facility, but couldn't bring myself to speak, the days enforced silence, following me into what should have been my private hours. I wondered, as I finally drifted into fitful sleep, if I would eventually forget the sound of my own voice. "You should be grateful," Catherine, the other maid assigned to work alongside me, hissed during morning preparations. "Most people would have fired you outright." Her words stung with their partial truth. I was, in some perverse way, being allowed to keep my livelihood, even as my dignity was stripped away piece by piece. The mask became heavier with each passing day, a constant reminder of my inadequacy. I developed a rash along my jawline where the fabric rubbed against my skin, red and angry like my unspoken thoughts. When I tried applying cream to soothe the irritation, Mrs. Harrington accused me of attempting to soil the mask. "These aren't cheap, Emma," she scolded, as if the cost of my dehumanization should concern me. I took to counting the hours of my shift, breaking the day into smaller segments just to survive it. 8 hours became 16 30-minute increments of silent suffering. The worst moments came when guests would speak directly to me, then look confused when Catherine answered in my stead. Some laughed nervously, others seemed disturbed, but none objected to my treatment. Their silence was another kind of mask, hiding whatever discomfort they might have felt at witnessing such casual cruelty. 6 weeks into my masked existence, I found a small note slipped under my door. "Meet me in the garden shed after dinner service. I can help." The handwriting was unfamiliar, but hope, that dangerous emotion, fluttered in my chest for the first time in weeks. I spent the day alternating between desperate anticipation and fear that it was some cruel prank. The hours crawled by as I dusted shelves that were already clean, arranged flowers with trembling hands, and avoided Catherine's suspicious glances. By evening, my nerves were so frayed that I dropped a full tray of dessert plates, the crash echoing through the dining room like a scream. Mr. Harrington's rage was immediate and terrible. "Can't even perform the simplest tasks properly," he shouted. Not at me, but at Mrs. Peterson, as if I weren't worth addressing directly. "Perhaps we've been too generous with second chances." The threat hung in the air like smoke, choking me even through the mask. I spent an hour cleaning up the mess, gathering shards of porcelain that seemed to mirror the fragments of my broken spirit. By the time I finished, it was well past the meeting time. I rushed to the garden shed anyway, lungs burning, only to find it empty and locked. Whether my potential ally had given up waiting or had never existed at all, I would never know. I leaned against the rough wooden wall and allowed myself to cry for the first time in weeks, the mask growing damp and suffocating against my face. "Your mother's condition has worsened," the nurse told me during my weekly call to the care facility. "She's asking for you." The words hit me like physical blows. I hadn't visited in over 2 months, too ashamed to let her see what I'd become, what I'd allowed to be done to me. My day off wasn't for another 4 days. I approached Mrs. Harrington with my request, writing it carefully on the notepad I now carried everywhere. "Compassionate leave is not in your contract," she replied, without looking up from her social calendar. I stood there, pen hovering over paper, searching for words that might move her. "If you leave now, don't bother coming back," she added, finally meeting my eyes with cool indifference. I thought of my mother, the only person who had ever looked at my imperfect smile with love rather than disgust. I thought of the medical bills, the crushing debt that would only grow without my income. My hand shook as I wrote, "One day, please." Mrs. Harrington's laugh was soft but cutting. "You really don't understand your position here, do you?" She took my notepad, wrote something on it, and handed it back. "Your salary after deductions this month." The figure was barely half what I was owed. "Broken dishes aren't free, Emma." I stared at the number, calculating how many hours of my silent servitude had been erased with a single stroke of her pen. Not enough left for both rent and my mother's care. The choice was no choice at all. I tucked the notepad away and returned to work, my mother's voice calling for me across a distance I couldn't bridge. On my day off, I discovered a dental clinic offering free consultations. The waiting room was packed with people like me, desperate, in pain, hoping for solutions they couldn't afford. For 3 hours, I sat clutching a magazine I couldn't focus on, heart racing at the thought of professional help, of someone who might see my situation and offer real assistance. "Emma?" the receptionist finally called. The dentist, Dr. Mara, was kind-eyed and soft-spoken. She examined my teeth with gentle efficiency, none of the disgust I'd grown accustomed to. "Your teeth are healthy," she said. "Just slightly protruding, nothing that affects function." Hope bloomed dangerously in my chest. "How much would it cost to fix them?" I asked, the words strange after so many silent days. She named a figure that made my heart sink, then hesitated, seeming to read something in my expression. "There's a program for low-income patients," she said, lowering her voice. "I could submit your application today." I left the clinic with paperwork clutched to my chest like treasure, my mind racing with possibilities. Perhaps in 6 months, maybe a year, I could be free of the mask, could smile without shame. I was so distracted by this glimmer of hope that I didn't notice the sleek black car parked across from my apartment building, didn't see Catherine watching me enter the clinic, phone pressed to her ear. The next morning, Mr. Harrington was waiting in the staff area, my dental paperwork spread before him on the table. "Thinking of leaving us, Emma?" he asked, his voice dangerously soft. "After all we've done for you?" My blood turned to ice as I realized the trap I'd walked into, as I watched him slowly tear the paperwork to pieces. "Consider this your final warning," he said, dropping the fragments into the trash. "Next time, it's your employment that ends." I nodded, throat tight with unshed tears, understanding that even this small hope had been monitored, controlled, and crushed. After the dental clinic incident, Mr. Harrington implemented new security measures. My single day off was now spent confined to the estate grounds. "For your own protection," he claimed with a thin smile that never reached his eyes. The mask became a permanent fixture, my face beneath it increasingly unfamiliar to me. The skin around my mouth grew pale from lack of sunlight, developing small sores that stung with each facial movement. I began having nightmares where my mouth had been sewn shut, waking up gasping and clawing at my face in the darkness of my small room. Even Catherine seemed disturbed by my deterioration, occasionally sliding an extra pain reliever across the table during staff meals, small mercies that did nothing to address the growing horror of my existence. One evening, while polishing silver in the kitchen, I caught my reflection in a serving tray. The person staring back, hollow-eyed, masked, shoulders perpetually hunched in anticipation of the next humiliation, was unrecognizable. "You still thinking about those teeth?" Mrs. Peterson asked, catching me in this moment of painful self-recognition. When I nodded, she sighed heavily. "Some of us aren't meant to be fixed, girl. The sooner you accept that, the easier it gets." Her words haunted me more than any cruelty from the Harringtons. This idea that I deserved my fate, that my very existence was a flaw no effort could correct. "I regret to inform you that your mother passed last night," said the clinical voice on the phone. The world tilted dangerously, the kitchen counter suddenly necessary to keep me upright. She had died alone, calling my name while I polished silver and endured silent humiliations. The nurse's voice continued, discussing arrangements I couldn't comprehend through the roaring in my ears. When I finally managed to write a note requesting 3 days leave for the funeral, Mrs. Harrington barely glanced at it before responding. "One day, the house will be full of guests this weekend." I stared at her in disbelief, my grief momentarily overriding my fear. I scribbled frantically. "She was my mother." Mrs. Harrington's expression didn't change. "And this is your job." "One day, Emma. Don't make me regret even that." That night, I removed the mask and screamed into my pillow until my throat was raw, the sound muffled not by fabric, but by the knowledge that no one would come if they heard, that my pain was an inconvenience to be contained rather than a humanity to be acknowledged. The funeral was brief, sparsely attended. I stood at the graveside with the mask in my pocket, too ashamed to wear it, too damaged to remove it entirely. I kept touching my teeth with my tongue, this physical flaw that had somehow come to define my entire existence. "She looks peaceful," a distant cousin commented about my mother. I couldn't speak, couldn't explain that peace was a luxury I no longer understood. I returned to the Harrington estate that evening, slipping the mask back on before entering, feeling it settle against my face like a punishment I'd begun to believe I deserved. Winter descended on the estate, the biting cold finding its way through my worn uniform, adding physical discomfort to my emotional desolation. The mask trapped the moisture of my breath, leaving my skin perpetually damp and chilled. I developed a persistent cough that rattled in my chest each night, keeping me from the little sleep I might have found. "You're getting the linens wet," Catherine complained one morning, noticing the small circles of blood on my pillowcase from where the mask had rubbed my skin raw during the night. I began sleeping sitting up, propped against the wall, the mask removed, but always within reach in case of unexpected interruptions. The Harringtons hosted a lavish Christmas party, the house filled with laughter and music that seemed to come from another world entirely. I served silently among the celebrating guests, a ghost drifting between their joy with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. One woman, flushed with alcohol and seasonal goodwill, tried to engage me in conversation, seemingly unaware of my enforced silence. When I didn't respond, she turned to her companion in confusion. "What's wrong with that one?" she asked loudly. "Born that way," Mr. Harrington interjected smoothly, appearing beside them with practiced charm. "Tragic, really. We keep her on out of charity." The lie washed over me like ice water, the casual erasure of my history, my voice, my very humanity. The woman made sympathetic noises, her eyes now avoiding mine completely. I realized with sickening clarity that the mask had become more than fabric. It had become my identity in their eyes, a physical manifestation of an inherent wrongness they believed I carried. I dropped a glass that night, the shatter momentarily drowning out the Christmas carols. No one noticed me crying beneath the mask as I swept up the fragments. In late January, a new staff member arrived, David, hired to tend the grounds and perform general maintenance. He was quiet but kind-eyed, acknowledging me with nods when others pretended not to see me. One snowy afternoon, as I struggled to bring in firewood for the main hall, he appeared silently beside me, taking the heavier logs without comment. "Thank you," I whispered through the mask, the words muffled but audible. He didn't respond directly, but the next day I found a small jar of healing salve outside my door, the kind used for chapped hands, but which I knew would soothe the persistent sores around my mouth. For the first time in months, someone had seen my suffering and responded with kindness rather than indifference or cruelty. Small gestures followed. An extra roll slipped onto my plate at dinner, a path cleared of snow to the laundry building, a book of poetry left where I would find it during my cleaning rounds. We developed a strange communication of nods, glances, and occasionally whispered words when we were certain of being alone. "You don't deserve this," he told me one day as we passed in the hallway, his voice low but fierce. "No one does." The words were like rainfall after drought, nourishing parts of me I thought had withered completely. Hope, that dangerous emotion, began to grow again in the barren soil of my heart. Perhaps there was still kindness in the world. Perhaps I wasn't as alone as I had believed. Perhaps David could help me find a way out of this nightmare. "Meet me at the garden shed tomorrow night," he whispered one evening. "I have a friend who needs household staff. No masks, decent pay." I nodded, heart racing with possibility, allowing myself to imagine freedom for the first time in nearly a year. The next morning, David was gone. "Terminated for theft," Mrs. Peterson informed the assembled staff, her eyes sliding meaningfully to me. "Mr. Harrington doesn't tolerate disloyalty in any form." I kept my expression carefully blank behind the mask, but inside, something vital collapsed. Later that day, I found my book of poetry in the fireplace, pages curling into ash. On my bed lay a new mask, thicker than the previous one, with straps that would make it impossible to remove without assistance. A note in Mr. Harrington's handwriting read simply, "Apparently the current model allows too much freedom of expression. As Nietzsche once said, to live is to suffer," Mr. Harrington remarked casually at dinner, months after David's disappearance. "Don't you agree, Emma?" The question, directed at me for the first time in over a year, caught me off guard. All faces turned toward me, waiting. This was a new game then. Ask the mute for answers, mock whatever response she attempts. I stood frozen, the new mask pressing painfully against my face, its straps digging into my hair. When I couldn't respond, Mr. Harrington smiled coldly. "Such profound insight," he said, generating polite laughter from his guests. This became a regular feature of dinner parties, questions posed to me that required verbal responses, followed by mockery of my silence. "Emma has such strong opinions on politics," he would say, or "Do ask Emma about her extensive travels." Each time, the guests would look at me with curiosity, quickly turning to discomfort or amusement, depending on their character. I became a parlor trick, a living exhibit of what happens to those who fall from society's grace. My hands developed a constant tremor, making even the simplest tasks challenging. Twice I was docked pay for breaking dishes, though my fingers had betrayed me rather than any conscious clumsiness. The new mask left deep red welts behind my ears and across my cheeks, but I no longer removed it even in private, too afraid of being caught without it. I began to forget what it felt like to speak normally, to smile, to feel air directly on my lips. On rare occasions, I would catch myself humming while working, only to be startled by the strange, muffled sound of my own voice. Each night, I dreamed of ripping the mask off, of screaming until the windows shattered, of forcing them all to acknowledge what they had done. Each morning, I woke to the same reality, trapped, silenced, incrementally disappearing. Like the words hastily scribbled in my journal each night, my sense of self was fading, the ink growing fainter with each passing day. Spring arrived with cruel beauty, the gardens blooming in vibrant colors I could only observe from windows as I cleaned. My world had shrunk to the interior of the mansion, Mr. Harrington having decided that outdoor tasks distracted me from my proper duties. In truth, I suspected he preferred keeping me hidden away, my masked presence an uncomfortable reminder to neighbors and visitors of what transpired behind the elegant facade of their social circle. Catherine had been promoted to head housekeeper after Mrs. Peterson's sudden retirement, a position she wielded with vindictive precision. "Your mask is smudged," she would announce loudly in front of others, though it wasn't. "Remember to clean it properly tonight." These small humiliations peppered my days like bitter seeds, sprouting into noxious blooms of shame that choked whatever resilience remained in me. One afternoon, while cleaning the library, I discovered my personnel file carelessly left open on Mr. Harrington's desk, perhaps deliberately. Inside was a medical assessment I had never consented to, describing me as psychologically dependent on facial covering due to severe body dysmorphia. The clinical language disguised the ugly truth. They had created documentation to justify my condition, should anyone ever question it. They had transformed their cruelty into my mental illness, their control into my need. When Mrs. Harrington entered unexpectedly, finding me frozen over the papers, she didn't even appear angry. "Oh, Emma," she said with false sympathy that cut deeper than rage ever could. "We're only trying to accommodate your condition. Not everyone would be so understanding." I resumed dusting with trembling hands, realizing they had constructed a prison so complete that even if I somehow escaped the physical walls of the estate, the narrative they had built around me would follow, invisible chains binding me to their version of reality. The annual garden party marked 2 years since I'd first entered the Harringtons' employ, though they would never acknowledge such an anniversary. The estate grounds swarmed with wealthy guests in summer finery, waitstaff circulating with champagne and delicacies I was permitted only to prepare, not serve. "We'll keep Emma inside today," Mrs. Harrington had informed Catherine. "Some of our guests bring children, and we wouldn't want to upset them." So I remained in the kitchen, washing endless streams of dishes and platters, hands raw from hot water and harsh soap. Midway through the afternoon, the kitchen door swung open, admitting a laughing couple who appeared to be searching for privacy. They froze upon seeing me, the woman's hand flying to her mouth in shock or disgust. The man recovered quickly, offering an apologetic smile that faltered when I didn't respond. "We were looking for the powder room," he explained unnecessarily. I pointed toward the hallway, keeping my eyes downcast, hoping they would leave quickly. Instead, the woman approached, her expression shifting from surprise to a clinical interest that made my skin crawl. "You must be Emma," she said, her voice carrying the confident authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "I'm Dr. Eleanor Whitmore. Leonard has told me about your situation." My blood froze. Leonard, Mr. Harrington's first name, spoken with casual familiarity. "May I?" she asked, reaching toward my face without waiting for permission that I couldn't give. Her fingers prodded at the edges of my mask, professionally detached. "Fascinating case," she murmured to her companion. "Complete psychological dependence. She apparently becomes hysterical if anyone attempts to remove it now." The words struck me like physical blows. Dr. Whitmore continued, speaking about me as if I weren't present. "Leonard's been consulting with me about institutional options. Somewhere with proper facilities for cases like this." She stepped back, satisfied with her examination. "I think Cedar Grove might be appropriate. They have experience with severe body dysmorphia and self-harm tendencies." The couple left, still discussing my future as if it were an interesting academic problem. I stood motionless among the half-cleaned dishes, the terrible truth crystallizing with brutal clarity. They were planning to have me committed. The mask had never been about my teeth. It had been the first step in a calculated progression to break me so completely that my institutionalization would seem not just reasonable, but necessary. A plate slipped from my numb fingers, shattering against the floor, the sound matching the splintering of whatever hope I had clung to that this nightmare might someday end. The days following the garden party passed in a haze of terror. Every conversation that stopped when I entered a room, every glance exchanged between the Harringtons, seemed laden with imminent threat. I began hiding small items, a butter knife, bandages, what little money I had, preparing for I knew not what. Sleep became impossible. My nights spent staring at the ceiling, planning escapes that dissolved into impossibility when examined closely. Where would I go? Who would believe my story against the Harringtons' carefully constructed narrative of my mental instability? What documentation did I have of my life before the mask? My mother's death had severed my last connection to someone who knew me as I truly was. One night, driven by desperation and exhaustion, I attempted to remove the mask, pulling at the straps with trembling fingers. They had been designed to fasten behind my head at an angle I couldn't reach properly, and months of wear had caused the material to adhere partially to my irritated skin. Blood trickled down my neck as I clawed frantically at the bindings, pain searing through me as bits of flesh tore away with the fabric. After an hour of futile struggle, I collapsed on the bathroom floor, the mask still firmly in place, now spotted with my blood. "I can't even reclaim my own face," I whispered to the empty room, the words muffled against the unyielding material. The mirror reflected a stranger, hollow-eyed, hunched, head matted with sweat and blood from my failed attempt at liberation. That night, I contemplated the butter knife I'd hidden beneath my mattress, considering endings I'd never before allowed myself to imagine. Only the faint, fading hope that someone, somewhere, might still see me, truly see me, stayed my hand. "Pack your things," Catherine informed me one gray morning in late autumn. "Mr. Harrington has arranged your transfer." Her voice contained an odd mixture of relief and discomfort, as if she were simultaneously glad to be rid of me and disturbed by the means of my removal. "Transfer?" I wrote on my notepad, the pencil shaking so violently the word was barely legible. Catherine avoided my eyes. "To a facility for people with special needs." The euphemism hung in the air between us, grotesque in its inadequacy. "They're coming this afternoon." 4 hours. I had 4 hours before strangers would arrive to take me away, to lock me in a place where my enforced silence would be interpreted as illness rather than abuse. Panic clawed at my chest as I mechanically folded my few possessions. Would I be permitted to remove the mask at this facility? Or would Dr. Whitmore's diagnosis ensure it remained a permanent fixture? Would anyone there believe me if I managed to communicate the truth? Or would my desperate attempts to explain only reinforce their belief in my instability? The irony was unbearable. The very tools of my oppression had become the evidence of my supposed madness. I contemplated running, but years of confinement had left me without resources, without allies, without even the certainty that the outside world would be safer than whatever awaited me at Cedar Grove. I wrote one last note to Catherine. "Please tell them the truth." She read it, her face unreadable, then crumpled the paper and dropped it into her pocket. "The car will be here at 2, she said, and left without another word. In those final hours, I moved through the rooms I had cleaned for years, touching familiar surfaces like a blind person memorizing a face. Each grandfather clock I had wound, each silver candlestick I had polished, each window I had washed until it was invisible. These objects had been silent witnesses to my gradual erasure. They would remain, gleaming and perfect, long after I was gone, with no one to remember the hands that had maintained them or the woman who had slowly disappeared behind a mask. The facility is clean and quiet, its halls smelling of disinfectant and resigned despair. Treatment-resistant body dysmorphic disorder with psychogenic mutism, my chart reads. I've seen it during shift changes, this clinical summation of the prison that was built around me. The staff are not cruel. That's the worst part. They speak to me gently, encourage me with soft words and patient smiles, believing they are helping. Twice weekly, I attend sessions with Dr. Whitmore, who asks me to write about my feelings toward my facial structure. Sometimes I try to write the truth, but the words come out jumbled and frantic, confirming their diagnosis. When I am calm enough to be coherent, they praise my progress, while ignoring the content of my desperate communications. The mask has been replaced with a medical-grade version, lighter but more securely fastened, removed only during supervised bathing when my eyes are covered with a blindfold, for my comfort. I haven't seen my own face in over 3 years. I've forgotten the exact shape of my front teeth, those small protrusions that somehow set this nightmare in motion. Did they truly protrude so much? Were they really so offensive? The memory feels distant, like something I read about rather than lived. Sometimes Mr. Harrington visits, his charitable support of my ongoing care burnishing his reputation in the community. He sits across from me in the day room, speaking softly about the weather, the holidays, the estate. Casual conversation with a woman who cannot respond. "You're looking well, Emma," he always says, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. The treatment seems to be helping. The staff beam at his concern, at his generosity in paying for private care when my insurance ran out. No one questions why this wealthy man takes such interest in a former domestic employee. No one wonders at the mask that no other patient wears. No one hears my screams because they never pass beyond the confines of my mind. The most grotesque part is that I've begun to doubt myself. On nights when sleep won't come, I trace the outline of the mask with my fingers and wonder, what if they're right? What if this broken, silent creature is who I truly am? What if my memories of speaking, smiling, being whole are the true delusion? If you're watching this now, hearing my unspoken story, I beg you to see what others have refused to see. I am not invisible. I am not mute by nature. I am not mentally ill. I am Emma, and I was silenced because my teeth offended a man with the power to erase me. My life continues in this half-existence, neither fully present nor allowed to disappear completely. Like this video, I am both seen and unseen, heard and unheard. If my story has touched something in you, please don't let it fade when the screen goes dark. Subscribe to remember that there are countless others like me, silenced in different ways, their humanity denied by those with the power to define reality. Comment if you've ever felt unable to speak your truth, if you've ever been made to feel that your natural self was somehow wrong or offensive. Like this video, not for entertainment, but as acknowledgement that my suffering and the suffering of all those forced into silence deserves witness. For in being seen, in being heard, even through another's voice, perhaps we can begin to reclaim what was taken from us, our fundamental right to exist as we are.